Hey everybody, our next guest, Jeff Dafler, wrote a book called Sobriety, A Journey of Recovery Through the Psalms. In his own words, he says, many people suffering from the disease of addiction who want to find lasting sobriety do not have much positive experience with religion. And while I have great respect for Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs which clearly state they are spiritual programs, their literature provides little in the way of guidance on how to develop and strengthen that all-important relationship with a higher power. Perhaps by sharing my own experience with the Psalms, I could help others. And so the idea for the book Sobriety was born. That's up next on Recovery Talks, the podcast.
From the birthplace of modern recovery, Akron, Ohio, welcome to Rock and Recovery. Recovery Talks, the podcast. Dedicated to sharing stories and amplifying the voices of those on the front lines in the recovery movement. Our commitment to you? To always deliver straight-up, sober talk with the sincere promise of a safe, stigma, and judgment-free zone. Recovery Talks, right now.
So welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Recovery Talks, the podcast. My guest is Jeff Dolphin. Jeff, we have a lot in common, and there's three things in common that I see. Number one of the soft ones is we share the same haircut. You know what I mean? I love you already, man. But the other thing is we're both 12-step guys, Ohio guys. And one of the things we also share is we spend time working in detox facilities. And that is a lot of people say, well, why do you go do that? And I say, well, because I will always remember where I was and who I was when I go to do that. And I can never forget what it was like for me to feel that enormous despair of knowing that this is it. I'm in detox. There's no more fun here. Which way do you put this thing on anyway, right? And just, I think probably one of my most transformational moments happened when I was in that facility at St. Thomas Hospital, where I realized this is it. This is it, man. You know what I mean? And it wasn't like I had, done anything, illegal or gotten cops or anything like that involved. But it was just that utterly, this is the lowest moment of my life. Here I am in a medical facility because I couldn't fix it.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think sometimes if I'm talking to somebody who's not one of us about doing that, they always want to say, oh, what a wonderful thing. That's so kind that you're doing, way to help other people. And yeah, maybe it's that on the surface, but I can relate so much to what you're saying. I mean, to walk into a room and look at faces of people who are absolutely at the rock bottom, at least I hope for them it's the rock bottom.
Right.
And remember that feeling, remember what was going on in my life, what was left of it anyway. And yeah, just that I never want to go back. It's such a reinforcement. If while we're there, we can share something that gives somebody hope, that gives somebody an idea that, hey, this isn't the end. There's more. There is a solution. If I could just find somebody to help me move forward. Yeah.
I'm always struck by the feeling of gratitude that I get when I get to leave that ward. And I go down at St. Thomas and I go out into my car and I get in my car and I always have a moment of pause to find, that grateful feeling to say, I get to go home and I'm okay. And I'm okay. And, maybe there's, we talked a little bit about earlier in our pre-conversation about, life isn't perfect when you get sober. Life still shows up. But I think the moment where you can go and do service like that and you can see the intensity of the pain of someone who's involved at the bottom of the depths of addiction and alcoholism or drug addiction, and then you can say, that was me, man. Now, but I'm not there anymore. That's not me anymore, It's interesting. I was thinking about that. It's,
almost the end of March and spring, you can start to feel, warmer temperatures some days and plants are coming back and all of that. But, spring, we often think about it as new beginnings. It's new life. It's things being reborn. And there's definitely a parallel to recovery with that. But spring also brings storms. It's not just smooth sailing, right? And we've got to expect that as we recover as well. It's not going to be a perfect life. We're still going to feel pain. We're still going to go through tough times and sorrow. The good news for me is that when that happens, I don't have to drink and make it worse.
people have been asking me lately, how are you doing today? And I said, you know what? I'm not drinking today. And that's the best part of all. I didn't feel a need to make it feel better by going out and doing a pint of Absolute Mandarin.
Yeah.
Which would have been in a pack of Marlboro Lights.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? $16.83. How do you always remember the amount, right? That it cost you? All I had to have was a 20 on me, and I was good. I was good to go. But man, we're here to talk, about your book. But before we get into that, I kind of want to hear a little bit about your story. How did we get here talking about recovery, and how did it work for you? What was Jeff like before Jeff got sober?
Life can be a strange and winding road, right?
Yeah.
Without going all the way back, I drank kind of like a binge drinker for a lot of my early days. I suppose I knew there was something wrong with the way that I thought about alcohol because I never had that control. I'd start drinking and I never wanted to stop. That was the problem. And early on, I sort of realized that if I didn't do something about this, if I didn't find a way to slow this down, then all these other things that I wanted to do in life were going to be really tough to achieve. And for a time, those things were more important to me than drinking. And I actually went long periods in my early adulthood where I drank rarely, if at all. And then when I did drink, I made it count. But it was really closer to, when I got to my, I guess, late 30s, early 40s, when it started becoming a daily thing. And I started looking for excuses. It's like, okay, well, what are these? We make all these crazy justifications in our head. I remember my dad had some heart issues, and it kind of runs in my family. And I read this article about how, red wine is really good for a defense against heart disease. And I thought, oh yeah, absolutely. I should have some wine every day.
Right. And so is grape juice, but we never thought about that, right?
Skip that article, man. So I started in, and I'd have a glass of wine in the evening, and that was frustrating. So I had 2 glasses of wine in the evening, and that was frustrating. So, I'd find a way to sneak off from, work at lunchtime and make sure I could drink during the day. And it kind of built and built and built to the point where I was feeling these things. And I always kind of had this sense, and I've heard, other alcoholics and addicts say the same thing, that I never quite felt like I fit. I felt like I was in some way a fraud, that the other shoe was going to drop, and I'd walk in one day and they'd all say, oh, we know, been tricking us the whole time. And it just this anxiety that, from life that a lot of people can manage. I couldn't manage it without drinking. And I would feel these things. And so I would drink to get rid of those feelings. And then I'd get drunk, and I would do things that I'd either have to lie about or, caused more problems. And then I'd drink more. And eventually it just got to the point where I couldn't get started in the morning without a drink.
It's the day drinking, I think, that a lot of us talk about, that are like, that's the kind of like they shift into a different gear, is when we're starting earlier in the day. And, it's one thing I hear a lot of former alcoholics and addicts say, I told myself I wouldn't do it, and then I couldn't not do it. And that was really the turning point for them. But that happens to a lot of people, and they can still manage it. Did you manage it? I mean, were you able to be employed and show up and do the thing? And everybody was like, hey, he's okay. He just he just drinks. And that's okay, because people sometimes drink, right? Were you one of those guys, you think, to some?
I think I was that way for a long time. Actually, I always swore that I would never let it affect my job.
Right. I was never going to play and get drunk on stage. Oh, no, because that'll be it. Then I'll know, right? The devil got in me, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
No, exactly. Already by this point, I had an OVI. I had ruined relationships and hurt a lot of the people I cared about most in the world, but I wasn't going to let it affect my job. That's kind of where I was in my head, that if I could just continue down that path.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really an alcoholic. I just needed, man, if you had the problems I had, you'd drink the way I drank is what I thought.
Right. And it was okay because, we weren't bad people, right? We weren't hurting anybody. If we were hurting anybody, it was ourselves, So was there a crash moment where you felt like, okay, this is it. I got to do something. Turning point. Light goes on.
I had a moment that should have been a crash moment. And where it finally did affect my job in a big way. There was a big event that I was responsible for, and this kind of cocktail party that I went to, and then a dinner after that, and then back to the bar after that. And I could feel a switch flipping in me that I knew that, I had to get away from the people that I work with. I should have just gone to the hotel room and gone to bed, but instead I walked out of that hotel, went to another bar. The next thing I remember, I wake up, I'm laying on my bed in the hotel room, clothes still on, sun shining, and I look at the clock. The event I was responsible for started 2 hours ago.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. Needless to say, people weren't thrilled. I should have lost my job then, but I didn't. And, went into an employee assistance program and decided I'd give AA a try. Went to 2 meetings, and I just wasn't ready to let go. I still thought I can control this. I can handle this myself. But the reality was I couldn't.
In the 12-step program, there's a lot of different opinions about how we should talk about being in a 12-step program. So I've always been really cautious about that because I just want to be respectful, and I know that different people have different views about it. Some people use Facebook and they're like, hey, I just celebrated a big deal, or hey, last night at the meeting. And I'm not one of those guys, but I'm not afraid to tell people that, I'm a 12-stepper. And if you know what that means I go to AA meetings. And what was different about that to me, and there's a couple things I needed to understand about it, is those meetings are just voluntary gatherings of people. And sometimes they're not the right one. Sometimes they are. And sometimes they're very different. People from outside of that program ask me a lot about it, and I can say, I can tell you about me. I can't tell you about anybody else that goes there or what anybody else does, but I can tell you that it's kind of like church a little bit, you know what I mean? Is there that crazy person that wears coats in the summer that sings badly that you kind of want to avoid that conversation with? Are they there? Yes, but they're also at work. They're also at school. They're everywhere. So it's no different than anything else. But the biggest thing about a community program like that, a 12-step program, is that you can have an opportunity to find your tribe of people, and you can if you're looking for it. And I think that's the biggest thing that changed for me. So you did that, and obviously, from what I understand from our discussions, is that inspired you to start looking in a deeper sense when we talk about higher power, which, by the way, we don't talk about that much on this podcast. And I don't know if it's been purposeful or not. And that's why I'm really so glad to have you today as a guest, because I just feel that that's an important component to my recovery, a sense of what a higher power is. I don't define it for other people. It's personal, it's private to me. But I do know that that's an important part. But what I do like about what you say, and if I could just quote you a little bit from one of your blogs, is many people suffering from the disease of addiction who want to find lasting sobriety do not have a positive experience with religion. And while you say, I have had great respects for AA and other 12-step programs, which clearly state they are spiritual programs, their literature provides little in the way of guidance on how to develop and strengthen that all-important relationship with a higher power. I'm so glad to have you here today so you can talk about that for people who that is part of their experience or have a yearning to understand that. Because like a lot of us, we grew up with a time of where religion may have been something we didn't really understand. Maybe we were it was a social component of the fabric of where we went to school or our parents or our neighborhoods. I grew up in a Catholic neighborhood, went to Catholic church and the whole thing. And I know all of us kind of like, we got to go to church. I want to go to church. But we felt a part of something too. So that was cool. It really was cool. Somehow, some way along the way, that changed for me. How did you get to the place after you had the life crash and you got into a recovery program? How did you start the road down to looking into where you had come from and to find out where you were going to eventually be? That's interesting to me.
in a sense, the seeds of that were planted in my past, even though I rebelled against those things. I happen to be a preacher's kid. So it's, I grew up in an environment where religion was very important.
Right.
And I learned a lot about it as a kid, but it also became something that I rebelled against.
Is growing up as a preacher's kid kind of like being, a famous baseball player's son, or because I always thought like those poor kids, their dad is the guy. They can't do anything. They can't get in any kind of trouble. You know what I mean?
There was a pretty stringent community expectation that I'd behave myself, which I violated on many occasions. But I was actually talking to a guy who runs a program for faith and addiction the other day, and we were talking about this exact thing. And I sort of related it to him like this. This is how I used to think about it. That it's like that saying in politics that when you see how the sausage gets made, you don't really want to eat it. That's how I sort of felt about religion, because I saw behind the scenes. And
yeah, sure.
It's a human thing, right?
There's politics, there's finance, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on that people don't want to talk about, the uglier parts, right, of people's lives.
Yeah,
that you probably were exposed to.
That's right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
My response to that, in a sense, was to reject it. What I didn't realize, which is what being in a 12-step program helped me to understand, is that in the absence of any kind of spiritual awareness or consciousness or practice in my life, I'd essentially put myself in the role of God. I thought I could call all the shots. I was living by my will, nobody else's.
Yeah.
I could see quite readily that didn't work out terribly well for me. When I got sober, I knew that I needed help from a power greater than myself. And fortunately, in my case, I had some tools from the past. They were rusty, they were dull, but I still had them. And I was able to get them out and use them in a way that really was transformational for me. And one of the things that I started doing very early on is reading one psalm each day. The book of Psalms had always been something that I had been drawn to. I love poetry generally, and really what these psalms are poems, often set to music. Originally, they were written sometimes as kind of the lyrics to songs that the ancient Hebrews would sing. And the words really always had an impact on me. And I found that as I started reading them in recovery, I had a totally different relationship to what I found there. You read over and over this raw human emotion that these poets express. They feel pain, they feel regret, they feel loss. And they're honest with their higher power about that stuff. They don't pull any punches, man. I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
And I saw in it things that I was feeling, but I also saw things that I wanted. Because despite, those, as they sometimes say, lamentations, there was also hope. There was a desire for refuge and protection from a power greater than themselves. That stuff was incredibly meaningful to me early in sobriety, just as it is today.
One of the things that I think I look back on in early recovery is when we would get together with other people that were like us, the common bond of having gone through such enormous pain and knowing and being able to recognize that in others and being able to want to help them, and how that transformed us and that really to me is the mysticism of a sense of a higher power, is that when you act in a way to help others and you don't exactly know what to say or what you're doing, but you go with the intention of helping and doing something, that to me is an act of a higher power at play. Because a lot of times we don't have the words. I'm sure you're asked to speak. I'm asked to speak sometimes. And in moments before I do that, I always have a silent moment to say, right about now would be a good time to give me some really smart things to say. If I could just say something that would help somebody, then I'll feel like what I did here today was worthwhile. and that's meaningfulness. But you get a special feeling of being able to recognize the pain in others when you have gone through that yourself. And that common bond, I think, is what a recovery program, and especially what you're talking about, the tools that in your tool bag, using the Psalms and being able to relate to people that have that common in their past. Because right now, I really want to go back and read all those, right? I want to do it, man. So when you were going through the process, in Scripture, you had probably been familiar with before being a preacher's son, right? Maybe we paid attention to it a little bit more in certain things, or maybe certain things that stuck out to us. Besides the aha moments, did you feel a sense of the glow of something warmer and something bigger coming to speak to you and giving you direction and guidance on where you should go? Is that what it was that made you want to write the book?
I have to tell you that the overwhelming feeling that started was one of peace. And I realized that I had never really felt peace before in my life, not like that I was actually okay. and that everything was okay as it is. Yeah. And that it wasn't mine to solve. It wasn't mine to fix.
Right.
That was a feeling of release, of freedom. And I began to want more of that. And so, interestingly, I decided to go on a spiritual retreat, a silent retreat to an abbey, a Trappist monastery in Western New York, the Abbey of the Genesee. And part of the reason that I went is because I knew that, the monks several times a day, they chanted the Psalms, and it was something that was important to me and big in my recovery. And so I went in, not with a lot of expectations, but just because I felt like it was the right thing to do.
Just want to remind our listeners, we're talking about no cell phones, no internet, right? And no talking, right? So, you gotta listen to that head, those voices inside your head and your spirit for that whole time. And when I was reading that about you, I thought, man, that's something that I think I might want to try, and I'm thinking that this is something I wanted you to talk a little bit more about. Is what was that experience like when you got into that place?
It's a beautiful thing that isn't necessarily a beautiful thing at first. I had this incredible experience when I rolled up, and I'm not real big on, I don't know how to.
My higher power doesn't necessarily wave a lot of flags. You know what I mean? He's kind of like, you got it yet? Oh, or should I try and show you one more time, right? It's more subtleness than directness.
I try not to read too much into things these days as well, because that was a bit of a shortcoming of mine and still can be. But I roll up to this place and kind of get situated, and I'm going to walk from the retreat house to the chapel for the evening service they call vespers, right? And I walk outside. It was like a light shower but the sun was setting. The way that it came together, just the clouds just started to glow orange.
That's incredible, man. That's incredible.
And I turn around behind me, and there's not one, but two rainbows, a double rainbow across the sky over the retreat house.
Yeah.
And I just felt this incredible sense of, you are here where you belong. And it was overwhelming. When you enter an experience like that of silence, the first day or two, all of those thoughts are still bouncing around in your head, pinging off of each other. But as you get into the rhythm of it, and it's meditation, and it's, I spent a lot of time walking on trails that were in the area along the Genesee River. They started to get quieter, all of those thoughts, all of those, inner voices, to the point where I actually started to listen. And that was a beautiful and peaceful thing. And while I was there, I don't have the arrogance to think that God talks to me personally, but I felt this feeling about the Psalms and about the experience that I had. And I felt compelled to think about how could I share this with somebody else? How could you share what you found? And so that's really how the book was born.
How did you start writing? A lot of people will say, you ought to write a book, and I, or Mark Lee, you ought to tell those stories you tell about this and that and this and that, and I think, there's one of my favorite writers is Anne Lamott, and she talks about really simple things about being a writer, and she says, well, number one, you put your, in a chair.
Yes.
And number two, you get over your crappy first drafts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you started, obviously you had the inspiration to do it, and then beyond that you had the willingness to be able to listen to the direction from a higher power to do it, and to listen to the words as they came out of you and not judge them, right? And that's the hardest thing when we write about things that are meaningful, often spiritual, is to just get out of the way. So how did that work for you? How did it start for you to just start this writing? What was that like for you?
So I thought about it. I meditated on it. I prayed about it. And for me, it was, if I'm trying to share what this gift that I received, it came to me one day at a time. I just did the same thing over again. I started with Psalm 1. Once I decided I was going to, write this, I would read the Psalm. I would then spend some time just on different words and phrases and lines in the Psalm that spoke to me. And I'd meditate on those. And then I'd take out a, leather-bound journal and a pen, and I'd start writing my thoughts, and I would pray for some kind of guidance. And and so I would do one per day and went through it, the same way that I read them the first time in sobriety. Just reading and writing. Then I'd set it aside, and the next day I'd do number 2, and the next day I'd do number 3. And some days were easier than others, I can tell you that. But that's like life, right? That's like life.
When you're getting into the book and you had a good run, you saw it showing up, it's starting to take some shape, you know what I mean? What did that feel like? How did it feel to know that, this is actually a thing? It's going to happen.
To be honest with you, total gratitude, because it's not me.
I know. I get that. I sort of get that.
Man, I can tell you all these different times in life, I thought, well, just as you were saying, I really should write a book. And I'd have these ideas, and I'd, start jotting some things down on paper. And the reality, it was always about me. It was always about, I want to be an author. And so I will write a book. And this was such a radically different experience.
Yeah.
It came from another place.
Yeah.
And so the whole time I felt like I was just an instrument for this.
Yeah. I get that.
This is just coming through me. And so I was grateful.
When we go to the output creative stage of who we are, it's almost always a culmination of everything we've prepared ourselves to be in that moment. And people say that about musicians. Well, how do you write that song? How do you play that solo? How do you play the guitar? And I'm thinking, if I'm thinking about it, I'm not able to do it. I'm not able to do it. If my head is, I can remember playing CYO basketball when I was a kid and being painfully aware of everything I did, especially foul shooting, because I was not a good foul shooter, right? And I knew it. So every time I got up to the foul line, I'm thinking, now do this and do that and bounce it twice because that's your routine. And I just couldn't make them. I just couldn't do it. I know from what I've seen about really skilled writers that I've seen, most often they'll describe it as, it doesn't come from me, it comes through me. It comes through me. And they're not so bold as to say that that's really them. Sure, they sit down and they do it and they prepare themselves to get ready and they maintain all the environmental things to go into that moment, but almost always it comes through us. And sometimes it's very painful and very slow and very ugly, and sometimes you can't get it down fast enough. You just can't write it fast enough.
I have to admit, there was a psalm or two during the course of this where I did get in my head a little bit. And I thought, I need to, I really want this one to be good. And I'd have to put the pen down and say, look, this is not happening right
I'm a
now.
very good writer. I'm a very good writer here. Oh, I thought that was really brilliant, the way I used to just twist on those words and the way I just had that great insight. That's when you're really in trouble, I think.
That's when you're in trouble, man. And quite honestly, that's when I'm in trouble in life. Whether it's writing or it's anything else, it's not going to work. But
the book came out in March of 2021. That's got to be exciting, right? It's like
it is exciting.
Man, it's like
it's a really gratifying thing. When I got to the point of having a manuscript and I edited it a few times, it wasn't obvious what to do with it, because I fully respect and practice to the extent that I possibly can the 12-step view of a higher power and a God of our understanding. Each one of us has a higher power of our own understanding. And so I didn't have any desire at all to promote a particular sect or creed or my own understanding of a higher power. It's just the desire to open this resource up so that others can find what they want. Well, the challenge with that is that it was probably a little bit too religious for certain recovery publishers, and it wasn't anywhere near Christian enough for a lot of Christian.
Man, I can totally see that now. So how did it end up you got it published? How did that work out?
Actually, it's one of those things where, a reader at Westminster John Knox Press, which is affiliated with the Presbyterian Church, read it, was moved by it, and saw, I think she connected it to what she saw going on in the world, that this is a major problem for our society. People are dying every day in every county of the United States from overdoses, from substance abuse disorder. And I think she felt a personal desire to want to be helpful and saw this as a pathway. So, they reached out to me, and we began kind of a long process of their core expertise is not in recovery. So they told me they were going to be sending it out to some people that they know in the recovery field to get, their reaction and response from it, which I thought fantastic. That just showed me these are the kind of people I want to work with. And they got some good feedback from that. We signed a contract and went through quite a number of rounds of additional editing and preparation of the manuscript. So
it's difficult for us in the AA community too, and trust me, I haven't said AA on any podcast as much as I've said it on this one, right? Because when we deal with the press, there are respectful rules within our tribe, so to speak, about how the way, we all agree we're going to talk about it. And, and that's really about respect. And I don't care what anybody else thinks about it, whether it's a cult or whatever, fine, whatever. If you need to explain it to yourself that way, that's okay. I have compassion for that. But I do know that when I ask people in the press to not say things a certain way, and then they go ahead and do it anyway, which has happened to me more than one time, right? I struggle with that, because it's like, please don't identify me as in this fashion. And then the headline on the front page is Marc and Jeff, a member of blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you guys, but you just got to take the chance. And here's where I lay with it. If the intention is to do good things for people, to help them, then I guess I'm okay on my side of the street. I guess I'm broomed off, so to speak, as the sponsor would say.
Listen, I've had some folks talk to me about that. I fully respect, the unspoken mores and even the traditions of our tribe. I'm fully supportive of that and respectful of it. I think my publishers probably said things ways that I wouldn't necessarily have said them. But at the same time, my hope is that I can reach out to people who may be struggling, who may be searching, who may not know where to turn. A welcoming presence. And so if I can do that, then I'm thankful, and I'll ask for forgiveness for lines I may have crossed.
And therein lies the reason why I wanted to have you on this podcast, because when we did our little first level conversation. I mean, I always, especially when it comes from people who are with a new book, and you kind of want to know what their intention is, because my podcast this is really about people that are in recovery, not just from alcoholism or addiction. It's from trauma, mental health, physical disabilities, like the eating disorder. This podcast is supposed to be a place where people can come and find other people like them that are lanterns that show that, here's how it can work for you. That's really what we're trying to do with Recovery Talks, the podcast, is say, hey, guess what? Tune in, and here's somebody that's making it. And, I know about all the stories that you may have in your past, in your biography, meaning the listener, but you know what? There are people that do make it. And let me show some of them to you, and maybe they can encourage you, because that's the intention of what guys like you and me are trying to do. At the core of what we're trying to do is just say, look, there are ways. Let us help you. Let us help you. That's it. Because we feel this enormous sense that this gift has been given to us because we are sober now.
That's right.
That is something that I think that I would, if you'd have told me, listen, man, if you'd have told me 7 years ago that I'd be sitting here on a podcast talking to a person like you, I would have bet against you. I would have bet against you because I tried everything. And it just didn't work for me. And by some miracle of whatever, you know what I mean? I'm sitting here today, very healthy, and, sure, life happens, grief, life, whatever. But the bottom line is I don't have to drink about it anymore. I don't have to use drugs and alcohol, and I can get through it. And I've got a group of friends that I can call, and they can tell me, yeah, dude, you need to get out of your diaper, man, and get on with it. Get up and help somebody else. Get over yourself. You know what I mean? And then I'll go, you're right. Thank you so much. You know what I mean? Or they'll listen to me, or I'll listen to them. And that's really what it's all about. Well, man, I want to just say thank you for giving your time. And I can't wait to get your book so I can read it. That's kind of a strange way to do it when you interview somebody and not have read their book. But, I think you understand. Sometimes it doesn't always work out so pretty and neat. And things don't line up in rows. But I will absolutely, when I get back to your book, I'm going to be calling you, man. I'll probably be bugging you. I'll be that guy at the end of your driveway in the end of the bushes going, hey, but there's one more question. You know what I mean?
we would perhaps have to find it together. I think, that's part of the beauty of this is we're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
And that's part of, I have all kinds of gratitude for what you're doing with this podcast.
Well, thanks, man.
And all the other things you do with your life.
Thank you, man. Thank you, man.
That's a model that we could all learn from. So
yeah, I just really am grateful because I often say to myself, dude, you don't know what you're doing. You've got an article to turn in. You should probably figure that out and get writing, or a podcast today. Oh, but you know what? I want to say thank you to all our listeners who tuned in for this episode. And you can find us now. We're kind of getting smarter at this. You can find us at recoverytalks.org.
Hey.
So if you can go there, and then you can find out wherever our podcasts are. And of course, please subscribe and download, because that's how we know that you like what we're talking about, especially when it comes to specific episodes. Also, like and share and follow Rock and Recovery pages for 91.3 The Summit. So to all our guests out there, stay tuned for the next episode of Recovery Talks, the podcast. And until then, everybody, just stay standing and steady on.